Okay, great. Well, good morning. Well, good morning here on the West Coast. I'm sure for all of you, it is varying times of the day. I think we have people from all over the place. So, welcome. I'm Erica Gregory, and I'm the managing director of NSquare. And I'm really excited about what we're going to do this morning, which is straight from the Innovators Network that we run. So I think all of you know this, but I'll just say again that it's our mission at NSquare to build a vibrant network of innovators from different fields who are working with experts on all things nuclear weapons, from technical challenges that we need to address to nuclear policy. And at the heart of our network is our Innovation Fellows program, which is now in its fifth year. We have had 5 cohorts of the Innovation Fellowship, and today you're going to be hearing from 2 alumni of Cohort 3. And we thought it would be great to actually start a series where we let the network, folks in the network, talk to each other without a whole lot of NSquare staff being involved. So today is the first of those events, and we can't think of a better way to start that series of conversations from the network than to hear about this amazing project that Natasha Bajema is going to tell us about. But first, I want to introduce her co-conspirator for today. Part of this conversation is going to be a kind of a set of probing questions from Danielle McLaughlin, who, as I mentioned, was a member of Cohort 3. And what some of you may not know is that Danielle is an author, an attorney, and a political commentator who appears across the U.S. and in international media. She is, well, there's lots to say about Danielle, but an amazing thinker who's interested in finding ways that being a lawyer can be helpful and beyond the corporate world. And when we asked Danielle why she was drawn to being part of the Innovators Network, she said that she wanted to help bridge the partisan divide in service of common challenges. And she said that she believes that our democracy depends on conversations across political, geographic, generational, and ideological lines. And she's interested in facilitating conversations that ensure that we're all listening to and learning from each other. So she's the perfect person to talk to Natasha. And Natasha, who is the mastermind of the project you're going to hear about today, is an expert who's been working in the nuclear field for over 20 years on national security issues. She was at the National Defense University for over 10 years and went on to found something called Nuclear Spin Cycle, which is a consulting firm that focuses on developing creative content with national security impact. So today we're going to learn more about a particular event that kicks off just about now. And without my trying to tell you any more about it, I'm going to introduce Danielle and let you guys get into conversation. And I think that you're open to conversation at the end with folks on the call as well. Is that right?
That's right, Erica.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so off we go.
Thank you so much, Erica. Welcome, everybody. And of course, Natasha, thank you for giving us some of your time this morning to talk to us and introduce this groundbreaking project. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you today. Thank you, Erica, for the lovely introduction. And as I said, I really hope that this is the first of a long series of conversations between cohort members and friends of cohorts and friends of the Innovators Network. This is just one other facet of this incredible group that Natasha and Morgan and all of the NSquare folks have put together, and we are indebted to you for these opportunities and for these connections. So a little bit of housekeeping first, everybody. Please feel free to use the chat function if you would like to ask a question or if you have any suggestions. You know, part of the purpose of today is to get a little bit of feedback and to help all of us think about how we can help Natasha on this epic journey that she is preparing to take. If we have time at the end, we'll open it up to Q&A. I don't intend to talk for much of the time. This is really your time to shine, Natasha. So maybe a harder question first, but for the people who are here today, Natasha, who aren't particularly familiar with the project, can you give me the elevator pitch?
Sure. So essentially, it's a travelogue show, most likely produced for YouTube, but I would not be adverse to Netflix. where I travel around the United States for about a year, probably 365 days. I'm trying to hit that mark, visiting current and past sites of the US nuclear weapons complex. Along the way, talking to locals about the risk of nuclear war and what they think about nuclear weapons. Also getting an opportunity to chat with experts that happen to live along my route. It looks like I'm going to be visiting all of the states except for Hawaii, Alaska, and I will be driving through Iowa, but I have not decided to look at a site in Iowa. So
that's wonderful. So I know that you're still in the planning stages. Of course, you're going to launch this at the end of this year. Can you give us a little window into some of the more potentially famous sites or the more obscure sites that you'll be visiting?
Absolutely. So I live in Texas, and so I'll be starting my trip out from here. And fingers crossed, I will start my journey visiting the Pantex site in December. That is probably one of the more sensitive sites of the U.S. nuclear weapons complex. It's where they do weapons assembly. They're also doing disassembly there. And so there are actually a lot of nuclear weapons on site there. And that's in Amarillo, Texas. That's about a 9-hour drive for me. I'm hoping to visit not just sites that are run by the Department of Energy, but also military bases out of which we operate delivery systems that carry nuclear weapons, such as Air Force bases. So there's Barksdale in Louisiana. There's Minot in North Dakota. I'm also going to visit submarine bases in Kings Bay, Georgia, as well as Kitsap, Washington. So basically hit those sites, the more obscure sites. So when I was doing the initial research for the show, I started with doing every state plus nuclear weapons in Google to see what I would discover. And actually was quite shocked about what I found. I mean, I've been an expert for 20 years and I was discovering things for the first time. For example, did you know that there were 2 nuclear weapons tests underground in Mississippi? Probably not. Did you know that there were nuclear weapons stored at the northern point of Maine? Probably not. So it goes on and on and on. We stored nuclear weapons all over this country, and a lot of that has to do with the politics and how nuclear weapons were created in this country and who was in charge of them, and the kind of the struggle between the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense, who both share kind of various pieces of that pie today. And so basically, I'm going to hit a lot of very obscure sites, a lot of nuclear weapons accident sites. So I'm going to go to the Damascus, Arkansas, to see the Titan II explosion. There are little markers, for example, in North Carolina, South Carolina, where bombs basically landed on US soil. They did not detonate, obviously. And another one in Texas that I'm going to do for my pilot episode is actually at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. There was a nuclear weapons storage accident in 1963 that blew up, I think, over 200,000 pounds of conventional explosives. So back then they stored the fissile material component separately from the high explosive component. And they stored all of these high explosive shells in igloos, rows of igloos in San Antonio. You can see them from the satellite imagery. So once I started kind of digging into that, I went to Google Satellite and I went to all the sites and I started finding these igloo sites all over the US. So yeah.
Fascinating. So you and I had a call last week. We are part of the next cohort of NSquare. Where the network is helping us sort of further operationalize our ideas. And you and I and a couple of others spent some time brainstorming sort of engagement strategies for you as you go around the country. By the way, for people listening, Natasha will also be still doing her full-time job. So this is not only fascinating and groundbreaking, you're going to be a very busy lady out of that RV. Probably. You're bringing 2 dogs with you, right? Your 2 dogs?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, very good. So my question is, what other kinds of engagement will you be doing beyond, the interviews with locals, the interviews with experts, the sort of the touring of the sites? How else are you leveraging your trip around the country to bring, awareness to some of these issues?
Yeah, sadly, I don't have a time machine where I can do everything, because it seems like, since I am going everywhere, I should try to do as much as possible. But one thing that's really important to me is to visit high schools and to teach them about the risk of nuclear weapons through a very current and futuristic lens. And I wrote a novel, techno-thriller about nuclear weapons and AI and deep fakes and social media. And so I'm going to be visiting, I think, about 30 high schools and giving a lecture at these high schools, working for Girls Security. So that's an organization that teaches girls about national security and teaches them that it's important for them because, you know, we don't grow up necessarily thinking that this is a #1 issue for women. And so I'm very passionate about delivering that message.
That's wonderful. So you haven't told me this because one of the golden rules of interviewing someone is to not have the interview before you have the interview. And I was wondering if you could share the origin story with us, the origin story for Radioactive RoadTrippin.
Yeah, so there are several different origin stories that go into the penultimate origin story, but ultimately,
Natasha, we have tried.
different threads. But it's safe to say that this idea would not have come to mind if it were not for my year at NSquare. It is infused by all of the conversations that we had during a pandemic-dominated year where we struggled to figure out how to articulate the risk of nuclear weapons to the American people without sending them running for the hills, especially in the midst of a global pandemic, but also how to expand our funding sources for this particular area, because we're seeing a contraction, not an expansion of funding on nuclear risk reduction. And that's a huge problem because the weapons aren't going away. And in fact, what's interesting, if you've been reading the news lately, is we seem to not even have won the fight that nuclear weapons should be reduced. It's one thing not to reduce them and not to have significant progress, but it's quite another to watch the UK say we need more, or to see a US admiral say, well, we don't have enough because China, and it's fascinating to me that we're in this spot. And so it could not be more urgent than today, especially with the types of technology that are coming down the road. So the origin story, well, I would say that, one of my last trips in 2020 was out to California to Mill Valley to hang out with Erica and Morgan and you and others. And we had the opportunity to visit the Nike Hercules missile site that is fully restored there and is actually, so I never knew it existed. I mean, again, here I am, an expert for 20 years, and I didn't know that this site existed, let alone, I'd heard about Nike, obviously, but I never thought about it. I never thought, what did this mean for America? What did this mean for American people? And standing there on the coast, surrounded by beautiful, hilly California, a couple of miles from San Francisco, right over the Golden Gate Bridge, I'm standing on a site that would have launched nuclear tipped missiles into the air to knock down a Soviet squadron of bombers. And I'm standing there, I'm like, how is this a good idea? This is back in the day when the US thought nuclear weapons could provide defense, not just deterrence, not preventing the use of nuclear weapons, but we could actually use them to defend our country. And so I raised, of course, the impertinent question to the former missileer, who's the tour guide. I said, so just a question. So if we launch these things to knock down Soviet bombers who are coming to destroy us, what happens to that detonation, and does it affect US soil and Americans? He says, yeah, it's not really a good idea, is it? Because we know that airburst detonations can be very powerful, can knock out our, electronics, the electrical grid. I mean,
so I remember asking that question. I feel like I remember you asking that question and his response.
Yeah, and so it just occurred to me that if Americans could truly understand how relevant nuclear weapons are, how present they are, how, they're so intertwined with America, that they might think, hey, this matters to me, this is personal, this is proximate. And I think we talked a lot about proximity, the problem that nuclear weapons tend to be abstract, something out there, some threat. It doesn't really pertain to my daily life. But then again, if you lived in San Antonio in 1963 and a nuclear weapons storage site detonated, and so we're facing also the challenge of history becoming history, right? So past generations, they have all of these stories about how things were. They understood the risk of nuclear war in a way we did not. We do not today. And there are still thousands of nuclear weapons in this world and thousands pointed at us.
Right, and I learned within the last month, not being a non-nuclear expert, about something called a nuclear sponge. Speaking of nuclear weapons being so incredibly integrated geographically in this country, really with the exception of some of the, well, I guess not even the coasts, obviously Northern California wasn't spared. I'm interested in these ideas of what your project will do in terms of being sort of revelatory, and the extent to which the sort of nuclear priesthood of the last, over 50 years have operated to some extent beyond the beyond public discourse, decisions in and around nuclear weapons, where they were going to be located, how they were going to be used, under what conditions they would be used, were really never the stuff of political campaigns. And to your point about this being generational, my parents' generation would remember drills, right, being under desks, and so those sort of visceral things that you have from childhood, you never forget. But younger people who grew up sort of even after the sort of activism of the 80s, they don't feel this. And ultimately, the nuclear threat is the ultimate threat, because it doesn't matter about a pandemic if we have a nuclear weapons exchange. So I'm interested, and you touched on this, you talk in your show notes about three things: proximity, personalization, and present. And is it that the show is going to be talking to people on the ground who have those real adjacencies?
So I share with you the passion to reach across the political spectrum. I think that this is a potential issue that could unite a large number of people, regardless of where they come from politically, ideologically. One of the questions, and you mentioned the priesthood, and I started in this field 20 plus years ago, and the way that we influenced policy was very different back then. We were a niche. At least my community spent time influencing policymakers. So those who actually were in Department of Defense, Department of Energy, at the White House, or US Congress. And those were our levers of influence. And that's where we focused. That was our audience. And one of the questions that I have that I want to answer with this show is, what are the levers of influence today? Is the American public more important to nuclear risk reduction than it has been in previous decades? And then can we reach them from our seats in Washington, D.C.? So my answer to that question with the show is yes, American people are probably more important to nuclear risk reduction today. We need to raise their awareness. We need to get them involved in these issues. And my answer to the question, can we reach them from our seats in DC through digital channels? My answer to that is probably not as effectively as we'd like. And that's not popular, because being physical, going to these places, talking to these people, doing this outreach, it's not the kind of activity that is typically funded. What is funded in our community are reports. And anybody who knows me knows how I feel about reports. Reports go into a wastebasket to die. But they are consistently what we need to produce to a foundation that's giving us money to work in this area. Everything else they say is less tangible. Well, is a report tangible? I mean, just because it's on paper, does it mean that there's tangible impact from that report? I'm of the opinion that if you are not on people's phones, meaning you're not in their feed and you're not producing shareables, things that are 3 minutes or less, that are easily consumed, that are visual, that are multimedia, then you are not getting in front of people. And I also believe that the role of advocacy might have shifted in this era of disinformation and just distrust. No one trusts information anymore, where it's coming from, what agenda do you have? But I think this one-on-one personal connection that you forge between individuals still has a way of impact, because it's emotional and because it's based on story and it's based on sharing stories with each other. And I think that's still what gets under our skin. And that's where this comes from. It's like, I want to get out, I want to prove to myself, because I left Washington. I left my defense career behind. I moved to Texas, starting up my own company. I have a job back in DC again, but I'm working remotely, just FYI. That happened in December, but it wasn't really my intent to kind of, switch back. So I left because I didn't see that there was something else I could do that was different. I felt like the things that we were doing weren't working. And so this is completely different. And it's completely out of the box, and everyone, many people might think it's even crazy. And as a result, it's really difficult to fund.
Right.
Because it's not a report. Give me a report that's tangible. I don't know about this thing going out and you talking to people. That's not tangible. So how can you prove that you're going to have impact? I'm like, well, if we could just assign the same metrics to those reports, maybe we would get somewhere.
Right. And you bring up a great point about the need to bring new kinds of money into the space, and the need to bring new kinds of advocacy into the space. Do you see yourself as somebody who is a part of a movement? Do you think there needs to be a new nuclear movement?
Yes. I think that, if you look at climate change, I don't know a lot about the climate change movement, but 20 years ago, I started out on climate change issues, but it wasn't really, kind of trendy at the time. WMD, on the other hand, right around the 9/11 timeframe, was super trendy. And so it made a lot of sense for me to kind of get into it, because there were going to be jobs. And at the end of the day, I'm pragmatic. And, but now look at where climate change has come. And I think a lot of that has been driven by, I think a greater sense of urgency. And it's very obvious the signs are there now, even more than they were. But I think it's also being driven by a youth movement, as we see with Greta and others. And, I think we need something similar. And the challenge is, how do we make nuclear weapons sexy? How do we make young people care about something that was invented in 1945, And I think we do that through today's and future lens. And I don't think that's really been done enough to look at it. How will AI impact nuclear decision-making? How will social media interfere with communication between the US and Russia, or the US and China? How will deep fakes shape perception of different countries? And I don't know if all you guys heard, but I think I read that the Dutch government officials were interacting with a deep fake of some Russian dissidents and were fooled. This just happened this week. So.
And I agree with you. I think that, for obvious reasons, not only the fact that I am in the midst of operationalizing something that was born out of the NSquare, was absolutely born in the NSquare network, that deals specifically with funding and proximity. So I too agree that awareness is just a fundamental and critical, exercise that this issue area needs to engage in. And I'll give you one example of Eric Schmidt. I was listening to Intelligence Matters podcast. Eric Schmidt was hosted by Michael Morrell this morning, and he was talking about AI. And he said, well, we had the nuclear age, now we have the age of AI. And I thought, this is Eric Schmidt saying we had the nuclear thing and now we have the age of AI. And to your point, there is no question that the world we are taking our steps into, the future we are walking towards, we will be dealing with the confluence of all of these future threats. And so I love that you have not only recognized that, but that will be infused into the work that you are doing. Someone told me a long time ago when I was writing my book, and I know you got this advice too, don't tell people, show people. So how are you intending to sort of approach this when you are doing all these one-on-one interviews?
Yeah, so I am also a fiction novelist, so I think about it all the time. I think the question here is one, and we struggled with this during our year, is one of entry point. How do we start the conversation with regular Americans about nuclear weapons. It isn't an easy entry point. I know this from personal experience going back to Thanksgiving dinners back in 2000. What are you studying? Nuclear weapons. We're going over here. You know, it's kind of like a conversation ender.
Yeah.
So my concept for the show is really to tell the story of my journey, my personal journey. I'm doing this trip for a year. I'm a nuclear weapons expert. I'm going to travel to these sites. I'm going to experience pretty much all of them for the very first time. I'm going to learn things for the very first time. And my viewers will get to see that in my shoes, although I have context that I can offer them. There will also be some content, technical content, to get people up to speed to understand what it is that they're really looking at and seeing. And then in terms of the interviews, they will be snippets of interviews. So I'll probably do longer interviews and, you know, release that as bonus content. But as far as the episode goes, an episode will tell a story about a visit or an experience that I had in an episode. It will kick off with me in the camper with the dogs. The dogs will probably be up to their antics in every episode. I will be visiting outdoor sites. I will be visiting national parks. One of the reasons I want to do this, and this comes from NSquare as well, where Chantal and I and others looked at the links between nuclear weapons and environment, and pretty much it's Chantal's and others' fault that I want to go see all these national parks again, because we kept talking about them. Because the outdoors is something that we all share together, regardless of ideology. So you'll have, you know, right around here where I live in Rockport, Texas, everyone fishes. So fishing is incredibly important. There are a lot of, pretty much 95% people here are Trump supporters. And so how do you reach them? Well, you tell them that what they want to do with their lives is in jeopardy, right? So because of radiation. And as I was doing my research for the show, I came across a book by Richard Miller about where he tracks the fallout that came from the atmospheric tests from 1950 something to 1962. And I was really surprised that in one of the very first tests, the Ranger shot out of Nevada test site, the county that received the most radiation is Refugio County, which is like 5 miles from me in Texas. We have radiation exposure in Texas back in that day. I don't think people understand all of that. So I think, you know, the challenge for me is to find the story for each episode. So I'm going to get all this footage. I'm probably going to have so many hours of footage, and I'm going to sit down. What is the through line here? What is the thread? How do I tie it into my experience on the road? Because it will be a travelogue show. And so I want to reach, I guess, my audience through my personal journey first and foremost, and they just kind of get the nuclear stuff by, you know, default.
So this is a show first and foremost, and, you know, the last 50 or 60 years, we have seen nuclear risk represented on our screens in both documentary form, so documentaries or dramatizations like Chernobyl, for example, and there was a 2010 Japanese documentary, Ashes to Honey. We also have The Day After, which was something I saw as a child and scared the living daylights out of me and much of America, as I heard, and including Ronald Reagan, as I read. I think he got a pre-screen, interestingly. And The Bomb, of course, which was a wonderful, incredibly moving and impactful documentary and live music performance that MacArthur funded and was spearheaded by Emma Belcher. So where does your work fit within these various genres, or is this a brand new thing?
Well, I think it's brand new. Because I don't know of a show produced like this for YouTube. I think it's facilitated by today's technology, to be honest. I don't think, you know, flashback 5 years, I don't think this would have, you know, become something that I thought was even possible. I'm trying to reach a mainstream audience by going to a place like YouTube or Netflix. I think that's what The Day After did. I don't think we have the audience for that kind of film today for any number of reasons. It's a little grim, for one, and I just don't think that's the right entry point for us today. I taught for about 8 years, I taught a course at the National Defense University on WMD that was taught through the lens of film. And so I had the students watch Day After and other movies, but also documentaries. And I think that when you don't experience something firsthand, the visual medium is so powerful. And I think that's why movies and films and pop culture has played such a role in the nuclear weapons culture. I do think that what I'm doing is new. I don't think it's new in its form for other purposes, because it's all over YouTube. There's travelogue shows, there's lots of shows of people, teaching people about science. And I mean, there's unlimited watching hours on YouTube of that sort of thing. But as far as doing this in our particular space, I think it's new.
I would agree with that, but I wanted to hear what you had to say. I have a question for you, and it relates to sort of the zeitgeist. So, we are emerging as a country, although we can't say the same, unfortunately, for all countries around the world. It feels like we are emerging from the darkest days of a pandemic, where we have lived very introspective lives for the last 13 to 14 months. And just last night, Nomadland won the Oscar for Best Director, the second female, first woman of color, which was a story about people really on the edges of society, living in cars and living in RVs. And I'm interested in where you see you fitting in the sort of in the zeitgeist, as we see these various themes, not only in our own internal lives, but in what has been made and heralded in film as it relates to, you're going to be in an RV traveling around the country. Where would you like to see, where do you see yourself in sort of the zeitgeist of our time?
Yeah, well, there's the zeitgeist of Natasha Bajema, and then there's the zeitgeist of the rest of the world. But for me personally,
the rest of the world, and then we'll get to you. How about that?
Well, it starts with me personally. I don't think I would be doing this if living in an RV for a year weren't on my bucket list. I mean, you got to start with that, right? I mean, it's a little out there. So I did watch that movie. It was obviously about a lot of different things, but it was fun to watch in some ways, because I realized that what I was doing was maybe a little fringy in a way. I think we might be, and I have to ask Generation Z this, because I'm a Gen Xer. I think we might be potentially hungry for physical interaction, for physical connection, and not just because we've spent 14 minutes, 14 minutes, 14 months. I mean, it feels like both. I'm so confused. Yeah. Cooped up, isolated, kind of shut off from all of our network and connections, forced into a square box on a daily basis. I think that I feel like it could be the right moment for something like this. It's the right moment for me. I was so restless. So this came out of, the other thread of this is it came out of a very personal moment for me, where I left my career in Washington to do something really crazy, to go to Hollywood and do TV and film. And then I got stuck in Rockport in the middle of a global pandemic, a challenge I did not plan for in my brilliant plan. And now I had to figure out a tangible way to make this abstract plan that may not be possible until the pandemic's well over a reality. And I didn't want to sit and wait. I just wanted to do something now. And so I took a week in October of 2020, and I took time off, which is very rare. I usually do something, write fiction or whatever. I did nothing, and it was terrible. I hated it. I hated every moment of it, because I had to confront all of the skeletons in the closet, all the cobwebs and everything. And after that week, I still hadn't figured anything out. In fact, if anything, I was like, I'm headed for doom for sure. I mean, I made this leap. At that time, I didn't have my current full-time job, which is back in the think tank world again. So, that was my lens at that moment. And I was having a conversation with a friend, and I was like, I just want to leave my house. I mean, that's how it started. She's like, oh, you should go on a book tour. And then as we were going, you should do a book, you should do a vlog, she said. oh, a vlog. And then all of a sudden I was like, no, I know what I need to do. Because I wasn't done yet with nuclear risk reduction. And I knew that as I was leaving because I didn't see anything else I wanted to do in Washington. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to, because I had tried things and they hadn't had the impact I was looking for. And I was convinced that they would have even less impact today. And as we move into this almost 24/7 digital world that we're living in, and it's almost like our reality has been so dominated by what's on social media or what's digital, that we've lost kind of a sense of being physical. And I live in a little RV park. I'm the only, probably, I think I can safely say the only non-Trump supporter in this RV park. And they had signs, they had flags, they flew them on their golf carts driving by. I was told when I moved in, we like our Bible, guns, and our president. Do you have a problem with that? And I said, well, everyone has a right to choose who they want to be president, is what I said. And, but they're just lovely people. They're just lovely. They're kind, they're generous. They ask me how I'm doing. They think I'm a little strange because obviously I talk with an accent, well, from up north, and I don't drive a pickup truck yet. That's going to happen soon. And yeah, so I think maybe there's going to be a shift, and that I'd pose that to Gen Z. Are they going to be as digital as, I don't know, technology is telling us we need to be, or are we going to see a shift back to being more physical?
You know, I tend to agree that I think the timing of this, and I know that you've sort of pushed this, but the notion that by December of this year, or the end of this year, but by the time you're launching, we will be able to have so much more in-person interaction, and this notion of finding a way to get the thing that you need when you miss it the most. And I have a couple of examples. So one is the massive number of progressives and Democrats who started watching The West Wing once Trump was elected, because they longed for the Aaron Sorkin, a Democratic, White House, and which never existed, but that they sort of had imagined in their And the other thing I would say is, the rise of, as you say, people watching Anthony Bourdain travel around the world on reruns as they are stuck at home, wondering when they're ever going to get on a plane again. I wanted to ask you about your website. So today is not only the launch within the network of your show and this incredible project, but radioactiveroadtrip.com is launching today. And I want to sort of embed within that question about the website is how can we as your network, how can we help you make this as incredible as we know it has the potential to be?
I think this would be a good chance to actually look at the website.
Oh, yeah.
Natasha, can you show us a couple of things? Because I know I, for one, am in the middle of the checkout for my sweatshirt. And so I just, I don't want to.
So unfortunately, I can't share it because I have to set up my preferences in advance with Apple or something.
I can do it.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so
I was going to say, or I can do it, and I just shared the link in the chat as well.
I'll go for it, Lisa. If you've got it up, why don't you go ahead and share it?
Yeah, so obviously, although I want to, have physical interactions with people, if you don't have a website, it probably doesn't exist in most people's minds. And with the visual medium, this is an opportunity to show the show. So right now there's no video content, but it is a video theme designed specifically to show off video content. But I put a number of posts here where I'm kind of documenting the origin story, the backstory, kind of the basic concepts behind radioactive road tripping. And I'll probably keep on posting it as I go along, because the adventure is going to start already in June when I pick up my Ford F350 dual rear drive wheels. So there's going to be 4 wheels in the back. The big hip truck. It's massive. And the camper I'm getting in July. So the fun is going to start. But how can you support me? So I think I redid my Patreon. I think Tim Westmeyer noticed yesterday. I think Patreon would probably be the best way to support me. It's for only a few bucks a month, you can support me and kind of get what I'm going to send out, a monthly exclusive newsletter where I give you behind the scenes information, and probably at some point bonus content. There's going to be a lot of content that I end up getting that I'll put out early, because I won't enter post-production probably until late 2022 and early 2023. So it'll be a while before you see actual episodes come out, but you can kind of follow my journey on the website. You can follow my journey on Patreon. Other ways to help, I'm going to have a traditional writer's room for the show. So if you're really interested in this and you are an expert on something, you don't have to be a nuclear weapons expert. You can be part of my writer's room for an episode. And basically what that will entail is I will pitch you the episode and tell you what I think the story is. And then I'll go get the footage. And then I'll come back and I say, well, here's the footage I got. This is the story now. What do you guys think? And that will be an opportunity for you to contribute your own knowledge, your own perspective on how best to reach the regular American people about some of these really not so fun topics or scary topics. And you will get for that episode credit. I haven't decided how that goes, how to list that. Hollywood has different ways to do that, but you'll be listed in the credits. Ooh. And then, you know, I would love to get celebrities involved in the show, and everyone knows someone. Kevin Bacon's 6 degree rule applies here. There are a lot of people, celebrities who care about this issue, and we could tap into that, and we could bring them in either via Zoom interview that could be quick and easy. I could visit them along the route and we could have a chat on their porch, things like that. Of course, I need any leads on funding. The funding requirements for this are pretty massive, without marketing, maybe $330,000, and that's after my truck and camper. So it's cheap by Hollywood standards. It's very wealthy by my standards. So any leads on funding. I do have a way to receive funding through the Council on Strategic Risks where I currently work. So if that's an issue, no worries. If you want to just do an interview with me along the way, and we can have a chat about nuclear weapons, and you can share some of your own personal stories and knowledge, love to do that. I'm going to feature as many of those interviews as I can on my YouTube channel, but as well as part of the show. And then when I get done, promotion. If it doesn't exist on social media, then it doesn't exist.
Thank you for that. And so Lisa is going to also email around, I know the links are in the chat, but Lisa will also at the conclusion of our talk today.
And merchandise.
Oh yes, don't forget.
I set up an e-commerce store, which was an adventure in itself, but if you click on shop, and I think it works, the store.
Does it work, Erica?
Yes, it does. It works. Absolutely. I just couldn't hit the final button because I needed to come to this session.
Yeah.
But Lisa, actually, if you go ahead and click on shop up there, you can give people a sense of what this looks like, which I think is interesting. And I hope you two will touch on the economics of this project, not just what it's going to cost to produce it, but how you're paying for it, which I think is an interesting part of this story. Because Natasha, as far as I know, you've not waited for philanthropic funding to come and make this project happen.
No, I sold my house. That's how I'm paying for it.
And so why on earth would somebody take that leap, right, to throw money into this project like this? And how are you thinking some of the small dollar contributions that'll come through your e-commerce, is that going to ever pay for this $300,000 you're investing, or how are you thinking about it all?
I'm hoping to pitch this to Netflix and sell it.
Okay.
So or someone else. I'm open. I mean, anybody who wants to buy it. But so I'm producing a pilot episode in September or something that I'll have an episode that I can show and try to, potentially pitch it to people. That's something I can show what I'm trying to do. It's hard to visualize what it is because I don't even know what it is. I won't know what it is until I'm doing it. And but I'll have plenty of time because I'll be in production mode while I'm traveling. I'll have plenty of time to pitch this and potentially sell it to a distributor or production studio. But I've had some conversations, and it's obviously extremely competitive, and so I can't bank on that. So my alternate strategy is to distribute it on YouTube, grow an audience there, monetize after a certain number of followers and hours watched. You can start monetizing your stuff, and if that starts to kick in, I can come up with other content and then keep the flow going and maybe get it back. But the other thing is that I am in the middle of a major career transition to film and TV production. And I've asked a lot of people, what do I need to do to get into that? And they said, well, you need to write content. Check, I'm doing that. And you need to produce content. And that costs money. And, you know, the worst case scenario is I walk away from this having had the journey of a lifetime and maybe having proven some things to myself and the nuclear community about how to get things done. And if that's the worst case, then I would say it's an investment well spent.
Danielle, I don't want to derail the conversation, but I would love to come back to this before we finish today, because what you're addressing, Natasha, is actually a system, a sort of a failure in the system at the moment, because it's very hard to use philanthropic dollars to make a project like this happen. I can talk more about that later. We've learned a lot about that in the last year or so, about IRS regulations and the use of charitable dollars. So I don't want to derail us, but I just think, you are an example of an entrepreneur in a non-entrepreneurial space. And it's really interesting. It's an interesting case study, which I think we're all going to be watching with great anticipation.
Well, and, I can speak to that problem with my own endeavor, Natasha, and you and I have spoken about this sort of at length, because one of the problems within our cohort that we sought to change or sought to solve was the fact that there were the big four funders, and that there wasn't really a lot of other money flowing into the space. To Erica's point, there are very, very strict requirements on what can be done with a charitable grant. And so how can we direct corporate money, CSR money, small dollar donations? How can how can this issue area itself learn and lean on and find new ways of bringing money into the space that are not those traditional the grantors? For two reasons. One, money is engagement. You get a small dollar donation, that's a set of eyeballs. Two, I think there's also a proof of concept issue here, which is how can you actually show the funders that they might incubate another project that looks like yours, that is non-traditional, but there's actually has the potential to generate revenue and actually to do something that this issue area hasn't done very well for itself, really, for as long as nuclear weapons have been around. I mean, you think about the propaganda films of the 50s where the American government was telling American citizens that there was no risk to radiation. But this great level of sort of secrecy and ownership by the political community, the fact that we have 14,000 nuclear weapons pointed at us, the fact that we have this emerging CSR, so corporate social responsibility and environmental and social governance waves within corporate America and within global sort of corporate, within the global corporate realm. How I think what you're doing and what some of the rest of us within the various cohorts are trying to do is break open this issue area to new eyeballs, to new money, in a way that helps us collectively reduce nuclear risk. So Erica, your point is extremely well taken. And I'll be honest with you, in the third part of our cohort, when you said, we're going to look at money into the space, I thought, well, this sounds interesting. But actually it was the idea that really animated me, because it's a hard problem to solve. And many of us love complex problem solving, but it also requires us to draw on the skills that we bring into this community that are not of the nuclear community. And that is another thing, one of the magical pieces about this network is that it is so diverse, and that we are using our own skills and talents. And Natasha, in your case, that's not only the fact that you're a nuclear weapons expert and a WMD expert, a national security expert, but that you are a creator that you are a writer, that you are a storyteller, and that you are, I think one thing that this shows above all is that you have great courage to step out of the think tank world and step away from the safety of advising DoD and doing what you know that you know, to learn something that you don't know in order to truly advance the cause that we're also invested in, which is, of course, nuclear risk reduction. I want to open it up, and I'm happy for any of you to ask questions. I have no ownership at all over this process at all. The last thing I wanted to say to you is that you said earlier that you use some of the pandemic to use some downtime, which I know you don't like to have, to sort of confront your own life and your own realities. And what you will be achieving with this project is that you are going to force us, and I mean us, I mean people out there who, actually not us, because we are confronting the reality of nuclear, of the nuclear age, but you will be in your own way helping people confront and make proximate the nuclear age, I think, with the hope that we will find a way of ending the nuclear age. You've already answered my last question, which was, what do you hope to achieve? And when you look back 5 years from now, I think we have a pretty clear sense of that. But with that, I would really love to just open this up to Q&A. We have 8 minutes remaining. I'm mindful of everybody's time.
I think there were a couple of questions in the chat, and Elizabeth has her hand up.
Natasha, what's the one place you're probably most trepidatious about going and speaking to people? What's the one site or the one state where you've got some anxiety?
Well, interestingly, I'm sitting right in it. So Pantex facility up in Amarillo, Texas. So you know, Texas is ideologically and politically different than Washington, D.C., as y'all know. And, you know, I do have to leave my D.C. bubble. I have to leave my intellectual self behind, and I have to get real, you know. And so I do feel, actually, I'm starting out in Texas. I'm going to Louisiana and Mississippi, and all of those states, I'm a little bit more concerned than when I get up to Massachusetts. I'm going to have, like, you know, people going, yeah, you know, so I've asked a bunch of my friends around here what they think about nuclear weapons. And one of my friends who's a Trump supporter, she's like, well, nuclear weapons are power. Why would anybody give up power? And I said, but are they really? You know, and so I'm going to have to really think outside of my own frame of mind, and, you know, what answers make sense to me to, you know, help people maybe ask the question about whether all types of guns are good. Maybe a nuclear gun is not a good kind of gun, you know. And so I think, yeah, Texas. It's good to get that out of the way first.
I think that your approach is the right one. And I go back to the podcast with Eric Schmidt, even though he thinks the nuclear age, the age of nuclear risk is over. One of the questions that Michael Morrell posed to him was, you know, if you go into, say, the Midwest in a community group, and how would you talk about why AI matters and why we should have democratic values instilled in AI? And why does it matter that the United States should be the leader in technology moving forward? And he did what you so clearly looking at doing it. He brought it back to the things that are proximate. He talked about healthcare. He talked about health. He talked about education. He talked about any number of other things. And so what you are doing, really finding that nexus between nuclear and the thing that people care about, is so important in building proximity around this thing that is otherwise just existential and untouchable and unmanageable and so terrifying, people just shut it away.
Natasha, excuse me, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how we can be helpful to you at NSquare, and how you might want to use this platform to stay engaged with your community and over the course of the life cycle of this project. I'm also interested in hearing from Tim at some point about Pantex, but we may not have time for that today. But how can we help you?
Well, I mean, you already have. This is so great. Thank you, Erica, Morgan, Lisa, and Danielle for putting this event on. I think visibility is a challenge in today's world. We just get bombarded by content on a daily basis, and to keep this at the top of people's inbox is going to be an extreme challenge for me throughout the project. I think that's a very simple thing that people can do, and so the more patrons on Patreon I can get, I think will lift it up out of our community into other potential patron supporters, right? So it's not just us backing me, but so we can start to reach a new audience that without marketing and promotional dollars, I know this from being a fiction author, if you can't throw money behind it, you can't get it to the top of the line.
So we've kind of considered this a little bit of a soft launch, just a, sort of a sneak preview of what you're doing. But there's no reason we can't do something as you get closer to actually taking off, where we engage more people in a conversation and get more people to help with the job of, getting this thing sort of up in the air where it's visible to everybody. So we're more than happy to help with that. It was, we thought a good idea to just start the conversation today, for which thank you so much, Danielle, for your more than capable job of helping us understand what Natasha is up to. But I think let's just assume that we're going to be back at this in a couple of months, and potentially back at this as you are on your trip. Maybe it's a quarterly check-in with Natasha on the road. Maybe there are all sorts of things I think we can do. So don't hesitate to ask. And I would suggest that anybody listening in today, if you have ideas for Natasha or ideas for NSquare about how to help Natasha, please let us know. We're all ears all the time. All ears all the time. That's going to be our motto. But I think with that, we might just go ahead and close for right now. And thank you again. And just say we are so excited for you. Thank you. Thanks for taking the big plunge. This is really, really something.
Thank you all. Thank you. I appreciate your support.